the seeking mechanism operates in the horizontal dimension. It's always on a horizontal dimension. So that's the world of polarity, worthiness and unworthiness, pleasure and pain, good and bad, dark and light, and so on and so on. As long as we look for our worthiness, our sense of self-worth, in that dimension, then it is bound to fail. So a lot of attention, a lot of effort is given to the acquisition of psychological and spiritual tools to move to one side of that continuum, which is self-worth. A lot of attention is given to improve tools for improving self-esteem, for perfecting the personality, for fixing what's wrong, for cultivating positive thinking, for manifesting what we want, law of attraction, for creating abundance in whichever area of life is meaningful to us, for attracting the perfect relationship, your soulmate, and for arriving at the holy grail of awakening or enlightenment, where you no longer have to feel any more pain. I've tried all of those, and they didn't work. Now, that's not to deny the very real and good work that happens on a psychotherapeutic level in meeting the personal wounds of unworthiness in the way that have been described this weekend. That is necessary and good work. But I think, as we've heard over and over again, it's not about fixing what's wrong. It's not about providing a remedy that takes the pain away once and for all. It's about meeting what's here. So that's not to be glossed over or denied. But if you want to get to the root of unworthiness, a much deeper inquiry needs to be included in that. There was a time after I gave up seeking anything. One of my main things was seeking love from a relationship. I really believed in the idea of a soulmate. And every time I thought I'd found my soulmate, inevitably they weren't. And the agony of that, the drama of that, the hell of that was too much to bear. Somehow over time I saw through the fallacy of seeking love. I saw through the fallacy of seeking recognition. I saw through the fallacy of seeking spiritual knowledge, or a spiritual safety net even. I spent a lot of time in India at that point, so I learnt about surrender. I learnt about surrender to the heart of darkness. India is a ruthless teacher. We often think of India as somewhere beautiful and transcendent and spiritual and so on, and yes, but she's also dark. She's like the dark mother, who, if you're open and willing, reveals everything that is unresolved in you. So India was my real teacher. And I learned about surrender. So there came a point where there was no more seeking, just a surrender to life with all its vicissitudes, knowing that none of it was real in some ways, and yet fully experienced. So it came as a surprise when this experience of inner barrenness, a dark landscape that I call the dark night of the soul, that had no end to it, revealed itself. And it had no story in it. It wasn't about what was happening in my life. It wasn't hooked in to anything, to any circumstance. Sort of devoid of meaning. And yet it was definitely here. I've only heard Adyashanti speak twice, but what he spoke of on Friday, I recognize as this that I'm about to describe. That in the barren landscape that lasted for several months, there came a point where I was somehow willing to give everything to that. That there was no more turning away or hiding or running away or following the maneuvers of my mind that created strategies of not facing this dark abyss. It's that fist in the belly. It's that primal wound, the terror of annihilation of self. Now, I didn't have the spiritual concepts or language around it at the time, but I recognize it now as that. And I also recognize that that same feeling had been around ever since I was a child. And in my adolescent years and my early adulthood years had led me to the brink of suicide many times. I was one of those people that visited many psychotherapists and psychiatrists, and they couldn't do anything for me because I wouldn't speak. And so I was impenetrable, and that impenetrability led me to want to extinguish this entity called me. It was unbearable. So I recognized this many years later, even though I wasn't on the brink of suicide, but it had the same texture, the same flavor, the same darkness. I had a lot more awareness by then and a lot more capacity to be with the feelings. And so I was willing to give myself to that without any expectation of anything happening at all, without any agenda of outcome. No idea that if I surrender to this darkness, then I will wake up. None of that. I didn't have those concepts. All I knew was that there was no way out but this. And something in me, let's call it surrendered. We could also just say relaxed. The knot, the contractive knot of self, just let go. And with that came a slight thought, a whisper of a thought, was that if I die and there's no more me, then so be it. So be it. If I stay in this darkness, in this abyss, for eternity, so be it. If this is the truth, and this is the way, so be it. So really what was happening there was all concern for me and the primal survival that that's not where the attention was. What happened was I experienced an existential aloneness, which is what I mean about getting to the root of unworthiness. Beyond the personal story of the wounds and how we feel and what happened to us, beyond that, there is something more primary and more primal. And that is the existential aloneness that we must each face if we are to be truly free. Existential aloneness is the core wound of separation. It's the core wound of separation that takes place, if you like, as consciousness incarnates into form. It's very subtle, but it's not personal. When it's truly experienced as that, and I don't mean intellectually, but viscerally, then it gives rise to great compassion, humility, and graciousness. Because everything that is born into form in some way experiences that, not necessarily consciously, but simply because of the fact that it's born into form. If we really drink that in, it breaks our hearts. It opens us. To the very fact of existence. Existence itself breaks our hearts open. I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. But let me just go back to the existential aloneness. Before it can be experienced in its universal form, let's say its more pure form, it can also be experienced, and is likely to be experienced, as existential abandonment. Yeah, slightly different. And there are layers and layers. Existential abandonment. Who's experienced that? I expect all hands. Yeah, existential abandonment. Let's see. Now, I'm not really familiar with the Enneagram, but I understand that some Enneagram types are more attuned to that. I think the 4 and the 5. Yeah? Is that right? My mother was a 4, I'm a 5. 4, 5? Yeah. Yeah, I'm more attuned to that. But it's a universal human energetic template, if you like, some part of our human geometry. Yeah. Some of us may experience it more naturally, if you like. We just go there really easily. I know I go there really easily. I went there really easily as a child, and some people may have to turn their attention to it more consciously if you really want to get to the root of unworthiness and be free. Yeah? Then it becomes a practice. It wasn't a practice for me, it's just what I fell into very naturally over and over again. So existential abandonment. The sense that you and you alone stand outside of existence. That you and you alone have been excluded from the kingdom of heaven. That you and you alone are unloved and unlovable. Existential abandonment is the personalization of the more subtle and more primary wound of existential aloneness. Existential aloneness is the raw fact that the I that you experience as yourself, the I through which you perceive, is absolutely alone. When the I that you perceive through, or as, dies, that's the end of you. Born alone and dies alone. We may be able to connect. We may be able to have a very strong and even abiding sense of unity. But that does not take away from the fact that the I is existentially alone. Now it's interesting that alone is the same as all one. Let me say a little bit more about that. When I surrendered to existential aloneness, which was experienced first as existential abandonment. Not only have I been abandoned on many levels throughout my life, by my mother, by my father, by my home country with the war, by the loss of all possessions, by the loss of home, by the loss of my academic accolade, which I had spent 12 years studying for a PhD. And at the very last moment, it disappeared. Life came crashing down. And so on and so forth. Not only had I been abandoned in my relationship with men, but none of that had been worked on and looked at and in some ways resolved. Attention wasn't on that. But the wound of existential abandonment was recognized in that moment of surrender to the abyss. The possibility of complete extinguishment was experienced as an abandonment by God. Now again, I'm using the word God as consciousness, as the totality, as existence itself, creation, that which exists, that which we experience, see, know, feel, touch, taste, the totality. That's what I mean by God. But I experienced that in a nanosecond as the ultimate form of separation. That I was excluded, and I only was excluded from God's love. Therefore, I was completely unworthy, unlovable, unloving. And therefore, in some ways, deserving of complete annihilation. As that was seen, I also saw the seeking mechanism that had driven all of my life and created a fortress around that excruciating belief. And I was willing to surrender that fortress, to give it up. And so in that moment, I died into the abyss. I allowed myself to be extinguished. And in that extinguishment, I was absorbed into an eternity of unknown emptiness. That was the visceral feeling and experience. Now somehow, the mind is still operating throughout all of that, and I thought it would end there. This all happened very quickly. I'm talking about moments. Somehow it would end there, and there'd be just this cold nothingness, an eternity of unknown emptiness. But what happened was that abandonment became aloneness, and that aloneness became all oneness. I merged with the totality, and it became the fullness of love. It had nothing to do with how I was feeling. It had nothing to do with the circumstances of my life. It had nothing to do with anything that was acquired or gained or fixed or improved. Nothing. It simply was of itself. That the emptiness, the eternal emptiness of being, the abyss of being, was scintillatingly alive with shimmering love. Not the love of anything. It had nothing to do with content. Just an indescribable love that was experienced as fullness, the fullness of God, the fullness of existence. Emptiness and fullness became one. Now the surprising thing to me was for that, from that point on, without any trying, without any effort, without any practice, without anything, the story of being a victim of life, of being abandoned, of being unworthy, of being unloved, and any other thread of being a victim, even the thread of being a victim of my own thinking. Yeah, do you notice that when we have positive thoughts, or there's a sense of being free of thoughts, or space between thoughts, we actually feel good about ourselves. And then the thoughts come crowding in, or we have some negative thoughts, or difficult thoughts, and somehow we overlay that with a bit of self-beating, self-berating. Oh, I failed, or I'm not good enough. I better try again. Better meditate more. Or practice creating space between my thoughts, and so on. But I was no longer a victim of my thinking or my feeling. I was no longer a victim of my circumstances. And there was no longer any need to get love from anything or anyone. About a year later, I realized that was freedom. That stopped the ping pong. That stopped the operating in a horizontal dimension. From that point on, the human experience is experienced in and from and as the verticality of being.